The punishments that good people suffer for not being interested in politics is being governed by bad people. Plato. Have you ever wondered how certain people, who seem unprepared or even lost, manage to reach such important positions? Sometimes it's a boss who doesn't understand what he's talking about, a politician who just repeats ready-made phrases, or even that coworker who keeps messing around but becomes a manager. Meanwhile, those who are smarter, calmer, more fair are often left aside. This feeling that the world is upside down is more common than it seems. And the most curious thing, it may not be just bad luck. There is a hidden logic that helps these types of people rise, and that logic is ancient, profound, and much more common than we would like to admit. One of the first to see this clearly was a man called Niccolò Machiavelli. He lived more than 500 years ago in Italy, and is known for writing a book called The Prince. Many people think he was a type of villain who liked to manipulate and teach others to do evil. But that's not true. Machiavelli didn't advocate evil. He just described the world as it really is. He showed how people truly come to power and not how we would like it to be. He said that often those who win are not the fairest or the most intelligent, but who know how to appear strong, determined, and trustworthy, even if they are not. This makes us wonder, could being too smart or too correct stop someone from growing? The answer is yes in many cases. Intelligent people tend to think more before acting, see problems in more detail, reflect, have doubts, and even change their opinions when they realize they were wrong. This is all great in terms of thought and justice, but in practice it can feel like insecurity or weakness. And unfortunately, we live in a world that prefers those who speak with confidence, even without being right, than those who speak carefully, even with knowledge. Let's imagine two people in a meeting. One thinks a lot before giving her opinion, speaks calmly, says that the problem is complex. The other raises her voice, speaks firmly, and promises that she has the right solution. Who do you think other people will follow? It's almost always the one who seems most confident. The appearance of certainty weighs more than real intelligence. This is sad, but very real. And Machiavelli had known this for centuries. Modern research confirms this. A study showed that people with slightly above average intelligence are more accepted as leaders. But when intelligence is very high, they have more difficulty leading. This happens because their thoughts are more difficult to understand, and they don't speak simply. In other words, being very intelligent can, in certain environments, alienate others. People prefer people who say what they already think or want to hear. Anyone who complicates or questions too much ends up isolated. This is a key point. Often, what gets a person to the top is not how much they know, but how much they seem to know. This is called the trust effect. When someone speaks firmly and without hesitation, we tend to think that person is more competent even if they are wrong. The opposite also happens. Those who are more sensible and recognize that not everything has a simple answer may appear weak or indecisive. Machiavelli once said, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, but few know what you really are." This shows how the world values image more than content. Additionally, there is a psychological effect called Dunning-Kruger. He explains why people with little knowledge tend to think they are very capable, while more experienced people have more doubts. This happens because those who are less prepared don't know how much they don't know, and those who are more prepared know how much they still need to learn. This creates an unfair situation. Those who make the most mistakes are the ones who think they are most right, and those who know the most are the ones who seem insecure. Who do you think ends up getting the most attention? Who speaks with absolute certainty? And it is often these types of people who end up leading. This dynamic is repeated in many places: companies, governments, social networks. Charisma wins over competence. A beautiful image speaks louder than a job well done. And when these types of people come to power, they not only command, they also shape the environment around them. And then the situation gets worse. They surround themselves with people like them, loyal but not very intelligent, people who will not contest or threaten your position. Thus, mediocrity spreads like an ink stain, and good professionals are removed, silenced, or simply demotivated. When an unprepared person rises to a leadership role, they are rarely left alone. In fact, one of the first things she does is assemble a team around her, and therein lies a big problem. Instead of choosing people better than her who could help her make good decisions, she prefers to call those who will not contest, those who will obey without question, people who pose no threat. And this is no coincidence. Insecure leaders are afraid of being exposed. They know, even if they don't admit it, that they are not prepared enough. So instead of strengthening the team with good people, they surround themselves with sycophants. This behavior becomes a kind of protection. It's as if the leader set up a shield around himself, made up of less capable people. This ensures that no one within the team will stand out too much or put their position at risk. But the effect of this is devastating. The entire environment begins to function below what it could. Good ideas are ignored. Anyone who thinks differently is seen as an enemy. Anyone who questions is silent. And the worst part, over time, competent people get tired. They leave or simply stop trying. They stay silent, do the minimum necessary, because they know that any attempt to do different will be seen as a threat. This type of environment becomes a factory of mediocrity. Incompetence doesn't just survive, it spreads. Each new position that arises is filled by someone who repeats this pattern, more loyal than capable, more obedient than prepared. And so, a company, a government, or any group becomes filled with people who are not there for talent, but for the political game, for friendship with those in charge, or for the lack of courage to say, "This is wrong." And when a serious problem appears, no one knows what to do, because those who knew are no longer there, or were silenced a long time ago. The truth is that many systems, whether public or private, have been set up in a way that allows this type of leadership to continue. And this happens mainly when there is no real charge for the results. In places where what matters is appearing efficient, and not actually being efficient, appearance wins over substance. Think about sectors where errors are not visible or take a long time to appear. A manager who makes bad decisions at a school, for example, may take years to show the effects of these choices. By then, he has already been promoted. A politician who passes bad laws may blame the previous government or say that the problem is international. And the people, without clear access to information, end up believing it. On the other hand, in fields such as emergency medicine, bridge engineering, or airplane piloting, this type of error does not go unnoticed. A mistake there can cost lives. It can generate immediate tragedies. Therefore, in these places, real competence is essential. There's no point in talking nice. Either the person knows what they are doing or they don't last long. It is an environment that requires technical preparation, correct decisions, and concrete results. There is no room for pretense. This shows that the type of environment directly influences who will take charge and who will be able to stay there. Another point that fuels bad leaders is the lack of transparency. When decisions are made secretly, without explanations, without accountability, everything becomes fertile ground for deception. The person in charge can invent any justification for mistakes or bad results, and many people don't even notice. What's more, when leadership positions are filled through personal recommendations, friendships, or favors, and not through merit, the quality of the work drops. There is no incentive to improve because the system does not reward those who do well. It rewards those who fit the game. This creates a vicious cycle. Bad leadership leads to other bad leadership, and everyone is afraid of those who know more, those who question, those who bring new ideas. Little by little, the environment becomes closed, resistant to change, innovation, and intelligence. And the saddest thing is that even those who start out well with good intentions can end up giving in to this system. The person realizes that, to stay there, they need to shut up, please, pretend to agree, and when he sees it, he's already acting like everyone else just to survive. This culture of fear and protection does not just happen in large places. It could be in a school, in a neighborhood association, in a small business. All it takes is an insecure leader in charge and the pattern starts to repeat itself. That's why it's so important to look for the signs. When no one else can ask questions, when decisions don't make sense, when the best start to walk away. These are warnings that something is wrong. And understanding how this mechanism works is the first step to starting to change it. When this type of environment becomes stronger, something even more worrying begins to happen. Incompetence stops being an accident or an exception and becomes part of the system. It becomes something expected, almost normal. People don't even get scared anymore when someone unprepared is placed in an important position. It's as if everyone already knows that, to move up, what matters is not knowing how to do it well, it's knowing how to play the right game. And this game, unfortunately, is not about talent, effort, or intelligence. It's about pleasing the right people, saying what others want to hear, and never, ever appearing to be a threat to those above you. This has serious consequences. One of them is that, over time, spaces of power begin to look more and more like each other. New ideas disappear. Diversity of thought is seen as uncomfortable. Anyone who has a different view or wants to change something starts to be treated as a problem, and not as an opportunity to improve. The result is an environment full of repetitions, ready-made speeches, predictable decisions, and a lack of courage to face real challenges. It's as if everyone is more concerned with maintaining their own place than with making something that actually works. This repetition of ideas and profiles also has a name among scholars. It is called homophily. It's when people surround themselves with others who are very similar to themselves. In the context of power, this means that bad leaders end up choosing people who are equally weak, insecure, or submissive. No one stands out, no one grows, and the entire system becomes more fragile, even if on the outside it continues to appear successful. It's like a beautiful building, but full of hidden cracks. It may seem strong, but any serious shock could knock it down. And the worst thing is that, even knowing all this, we still fall into the same traps. We are still attracted to leaders who speak with great certainty, who promise simple solutions to complex problems, who use sound bites instead of real proposals. And why does this happen? Because our brain likes to feel safe. When we are confused, scared, or don't understand a situation, we want someone to tell us, "I know what to do. Leave it to me." It calms us, gives us relief. Even if deep down we know that no one has all the answers, hearing someone speak so firmly makes us believe, at least for a while. This desire for security, for a clear answer, comes from a very old part of our mind. In times of crisis, such as a pandemic, an economic crisis, or a political conflict, this part of the brain becomes even more active. We want certainty, and that's where bad leaders shine. They do not hesitate. They show no doubt. They admit no error. They beat their chest and say they have the solution. And even if they are wrong, they manage to attract a lot of people. Because deep down, we are seeking comfort. And comfort sometimes speaks louder than truth. This explains why so many well-intentioned, well-educated people with good ideas end up losing space to figures who only use charisma and empty speeches. The truth is often more complicated. Good professionals say, "It depends. Let's analyze. It's a process." Populist leaders say, "I'll solve it. It's simple. Trust me." And because our brain prefers the shortest path, we often choose to listen to the second one, even if, up front, the price for this will be high. This is not to say that all strong leadership is false, or that all confident people are incompetent, but understanding that there is a difference between those who are truly prepared and those who just play this role. And today, more than ever, we live in a world that values appearance. Whoever speaks louder, who shows up more, who makes bolder promises ends up being seen as more capable, even if they have no results to show. It's a problem of perception. And until we learn to see beyond pretty words, we will continue to fall into the same traps. The most worrying thing is that once this type of leadership is established, it creates a defense system that protects it from any criticism. The people around them learn that contesting is dangerous. Criticism turns into betrayal. Doubt becomes weakness. And thus, power shields itself. Anyone outside the circle does not have access. Those inside are afraid to leave. And those who observe from afar often don't even understand how everything is sustained, but feel the effects firsthand. Bad decisions, services that don't work, promises that are never kept. This cycle only begins to change when we are able to look at these structures clearly, with courage, and with a willingness to think differently. When we stop being impressed by those who shout the loudest and start to value those who really understand what they are talking about. When we stop accepting easy solutions to difficult problems. And above all, when we create spaces where being competent is not a reason for distrust but rather for respect. Creating spaces where competence is valued seems simple, but it requires profound changes, not just in people, but in the systems that sustain power. Because it's one thing to recognize that the problem exists. Another, much more difficult, is to change the structure that keeps this problem functioning. And this structure is often made up of invisible habits, poorly thought out rules, and a culture that gives more value to appearance than results. Until this changes, the same patterns repeat themselves, and the cycle of incompetence strengthens. Many of these systems were set up in a way that makes actual billing difficult. In other words, even when a leader makes mistakes, he does not suffer the consequences. Responsibility is diluted, blame is placed on others, or the error is hidden behind confusing reports and technical speeches that no one understands. This happens a lot in environments where there is no external control, where everything is resolved between a few people, and where anyone who questions is quickly silenced. Under these conditions, power closes in on itself, creating a kind of bubble, and within that bubble, reality can be manipulated at will. This is why structures with more transparency and more participation tend to work better. When decisions need to be explained, justified, and evaluated by outsiders, it becomes more difficult to hide incompetence. Imagine an organization where every major decision has to be presented to an external board, made up of people with different profiles, with access to complete information. Now compare this with an institution where everything is decided by a closed group, without accountability. Which one do you think has the best chance of developing good leaders? The answer is obvious, but unfortunately, many institutions still operate in a closed model, where whoever is in charge answers only to themselves or a restricted group of allies. Another important point is the way success is measured. When objectives are clear, concrete, and based on real data, it becomes easier to know if a person is doing a good job. But when success depends on vague criteria, such as giving a good image, motivating the team, or being charismatic, then everything becomes a matter of perception. And perception, as we have already seen, can be manipulated. A leader who makes exciting promises without delivering anything concrete may appear more effective than someone who is making quiet improvements without fanfare. This type of illusion spreads easily in environments where communication is controlled by a few. If the only source of information comes from within the leadership, and if the media or internal communication channels only repeat what the boss says, then the image that is created may be completely different from reality. Outsiders have no way of knowing what is really happening, and those inside are often afraid to say what they see. Thus, the system becomes a theater, where everyone plays roles, but few tell the truth. There is also a factor that few people realize: economic incentives. In many places, leaders are rewarded for short-term results. If the quarter's goal was reached, it doesn't matter if this was done at the expense of bad decisions that will blow up the following year. The important thing is to show good numbers now, to impress shareholders, voters, or superiors. This type of logic encourages hasty, irresponsible, and even dangerous decisions. The focus isn't on doing the right thing. It's on doing what feels right in the moment, even if it causes harm later. It was exactly this type of thinking that led to massive financial crises, like the one in 2008. At the time, many leaders of financial institutions made risky decisions to generate quick profits. They knew they were betting too high, but they were protected by million-dollar bonuses and contracts that shielded them from the consequences. When everything collapsed, millions of people lost jobs, homes, and savings. But those responsible emerged practically unscathed. This shows how poorly designed systems can reward the worst behavior and punish those who try to act responsibly. In this scenario, it is not difficult to understand why so many talented people give up on seeking leadership positions. They realize that, to move up, it would be necessary to give up values, pretend all the time, play a game that has nothing to do with competence, but with vanity and internal politics. And then they make the choice to follow another path, away from the spotlight where they can still work honestly. As a result, the space of power becomes empty of prepared people and increasingly occupied by those who know how to act, not by those who know how to do it. But there are ways out. They are not simple nor fast, but they exist. They start with strengthening the culture of responsibility. This means creating clear rules, opening space for different opinions, encouraging constructive criticism, and valuing real results, not just the image. It also means rewarding those who do things well, even if they don't shine as brightly, and having the courage to remove those who only know how to promote themselves. And above all, it means making it clear that leadership is not a stage for vanity, but a position of service, a place where more preparation, more listening, and more humility are required than anywhere else. This culture change, however, does not happen alone. It needs to be built with intention, with patience, and with a keen eye for details that often go unnoticed. And one of the most important details, perhaps the most subtle, is the way in which leaders protect themselves. Bad leaders, when they realize that they are in a more demanding environment, with more demands and transparency, do not usually change their stance. Instead, they refine their survival strategies. And among these strategies, there is one that is extremely effective, turning any criticism into a personal attack or threat to the group. It works more or less like this. When someone asks a difficult question or points out an error, the leader is quick to say that it is not a criticism of the work, but an attempt to divide the team, sabotage progress, or even attack the group's mission. This diverts the focus from the real problem and puts the spotlight on the critic, as if he were the problem. This type of maneuver affects a very strong feeling: belonging. No one wants to be seen as an enemy or traitor. Then little by little, people stop questioning, not because they agree, but because they are afraid of being misunderstood. This emotional game is very powerful because it turns leadership into a symbol, not a function. The figure of the leader becomes confused with the identity of the group. When this happens, any criticism of the leader becomes, in people's minds, a criticism of the entire group. This is what experts call identity fusion. The group and the leader become one, and if you attack one, you are attacking them all. That's why, even in the face of obvious mistakes, there are those who defend certain leaders tooth and nail. It's not just logic, it's an emotional bond. It's a sense of belonging, and breaking with this requires much more than arguments. It requires courage, time, and, often, a reality check. Additionally, insecure leaders use another very common tactic: excessive noise. They create constant crises, artificial controversies, last-minute changes, conflicts with invented adversaries, all to occupy people's attention with urgent things, and thus hide what really matters. It's the famous throwing smoke in your eyes. When we're always dealing with a new problem, an emergency, or a mess, we don't have the time or energy to ask deeper questions. The mind gets tired, and in this tiredness, many important things go unnoticed. This excessive information, pressure, and noise creates what is called cognitive load. It's as if our ability to think clearly is overloaded. It happens to all of us. When we're stressed or tired, we make worse decisions, we're less critical and more vulnerable to bad ideas. And manipulative leaders know this. They use this confusion as a shield. While everyone is worried about the latest controversy, they make hidden decisions, weaken institutions, and reinforce their own privileges. It's a game of constant distraction. Another common trick is the use of mixed messages. One day the leader says one thing, the next he says the opposite, and the third he acts differently from the previous two statements. It sounds confusing, and it is. But this confusion has a dangerous effect. It weakens the idea of truth. If everything can be said and unsaid, if nothing is fixed, if everything changes according to convenience, people lose their sense of reference. They begin to think that there is no right or wrong, that everything depends on their point of view. And when that happens, it becomes much more difficult to hold anyone accountable for anything. After all, how can we demand coherence from someone who keeps changing their speech? This confusion is not accidental. It is a type of strategy that some call controlled chaos. Chaos keeps people busy, lost, dependent. And while everyone tries to understand what is happening, whoever controls the game moves on, almost unnoticed. This feeling that we are always reacting, always chasing, never in control, it is created on purpose. And it's one of the most effective ways to keep incompetence protected. It's important to say that all of this doesn't just happen in governments or large companies. It also happens in small environments. A union, a neighborhood association, a church, a classroom. Whenever a leader is afraid of being questioned and prefers to confuse rather than explain, hide rather than be accountable, silence rather than listen, this pattern begins to form. It doesn't take a big stage for the misused power play to begin. Sometimes it all starts with small decisions, small silences, small omissions, which when added together, create an entire culture based on fear and appearance. Therefore, we need to pay attention not only to what is said, but to the way it is said. We need to notice the gestures, the choices, the people who are valued, and those who are pushed away. We need to develop a more trained eye, more attentive to the traps that involve emotional language, beautiful speeches, and catchphrases. And above all, we need to cultivate the courage to ask questions, even when everyone prefers silence. This courage to ask questions, to go against the tide, to question what seems untouchable, is one of the first steps to breaking this vicious cycle. But courage alone is not enough. You also need to create environments that welcome this type of attitude. Because if every time someone raises their hand to say, "This isn't right," it's treated as a problem, no one else will take a chance. Collective silence sets in not because everyone agrees, but because everyone is afraid to speak. And when fear rules, incompetence reigns supreme. Healthy leadership environments encourage debate. They understand that the confrontation of ideas is not a threat. It is a tool. It is in these places that a mistake can be corrected before it becomes a tragedy. It is in these spaces that people grow, learn, and create together. But for this, it is necessary to have clear rules, open spaces for listening, leaders who are not offended by questions, but rather grateful for them. It is also necessary to combat the idea that just because someone is at the top, they are always right. Authority should not be confused with infallibility. Unfortunately, in many places what we see is the opposite. Leadership is treated as a prestigious position, not a responsibility. Whoever gets up there protects themselves, distances themselves, and avoids being charged. And then, little by little, a type of informal royalty is created, where criticism becomes offense and suggestions become threats. This type of stance completely blocks collective growth. And the most curious thing is that by doing this, the leader himself ends up harming himself as well. Because without true listening, he begins to make bad, ill-informed decisions and isolates himself from reality. Bad leadership doesn't just harm others, it also digs its own hole. This isolation is fueled by another dangerous phenomenon, the cult of personality. When a leader starts to be treated as someone special, almost above the rules, everything becomes more difficult. People around you start to praise you too much, to agree with everything, to pretend that everything is okay even when it isn't. The environment becomes a vanity stage, and little by little, any possibility of honest criticism is lost. Decisions start to be made based on the ego, and not on the real needs of the group. At the same time, those outside this circle begin to feel powerless. You know something is wrong, but you don't see room for change. He knows there is manipulation, but he doesn't find support to face it. And often these people end up giving up, moving away, or simply adapting. They keep turning a blind eye, telling themselves that it's better to stay quiet, that it's not worth fighting. And so the system remains, because the silence of the good is the food of those who shouldn't be there. But this reality does not need to be definitive. It can be transformed. The first step is to change the way we choose and evaluate our leaders. We need to stop valuing those who talk the loudest, those who promise too much, those who seem to have all the answers. We need to learn to value those who listen well, those who admit when they don't know, those who seek solutions in groups. True leadership is not made of impactful phrases. It is made of responsibility, empathy, and a real desire to serve the collective. We also need to rethink how we deal with error. Making mistakes is part of the process, but hiding the error is what destroys trust. A good leader is one who recognizes his failures, corrects his path, and moves forward with more learning. He is not someone who pretends to be perfect all the time. The culture of perfection creates monsters. The culture of honesty creates spaces where everyone can improve together. And this is only possible when the group values the process more than appearance. Another essential point is the strengthening of diversity of thought. When everyone around a leader thinks the same, mistakes are repeated. But when there are different voices, varied experiences, points of view that complement each other, then we have a chance to build something solid. Diversity is not just a social agenda. It is a tool for collective intelligence. Diverse groups make fewer mistakes, see further, and protect themselves better from the traps of misused power. All of this requires a change of mindset. It demands that we stop looking for ready-made heroes and start building mature collectives. It demands that we exchange haste for care, spectacle for consistency, shouting for dialogue. It's not easy. It will take time, but it is possible and necessary. When this change in mentality begins to happen, even if little by little, the environment also begins to transform. The space that was previously occupied by vanity, unfair competition, and the fear of making mistakes is being replaced by something healthier, a climate of trust, where people can speak freely, where different ideas are welcome, and where the common objective is worth more than individual interests. And it is in this type of environment that competence once again has value, not as a medal for a few, but as a collective commitment to what really works. This commitment is strengthened when leadership understands that its role is not to shine alone, but to make others shine together. Good leaders build bridges, not walls. They identify talents, open space for new ideas, create channels for dialogue, and, most importantly, have the humility to learn from others. They know that no one knows everything, and by recognizing this, they gain even more respect. Because true respect does not come from fear, but from admiration for those who are capable of listening, changing their opinions, and acting responsibly. In contrast, when leadership is ego-based, everything becomes fragile. The system depends on a single person, a single way of thinking, and any shock, a public criticism, a wrong decision, an external pressure, can put everything at risk. Because there is no true support network, there is no mutual trust, there is no solid foundation. It's all built on image, and images, as we know, break easily. All it takes is one slip, and the whole castle collapses. Therefore, the strongest structures are those that do not depend solely on those at the top. They are supported by well-defined processes, shared values, and mechanisms that prevent abuse, even when the current leader is not ideal. They were designed to last, to resist time, changes, and even errors. And this is only possible when important decisions are not concentrated in a few hands, but are divided, evaluated, and monitored closely. This also applies to the way information circulates. When data is available, when decisions are explained clearly, when there are real channels for complaints and suggestions, the risk of manipulation drops significantly. Transparency isn't just a nice gesture, it's a safeguard against incompetence. It is a way to ensure that leaders are accountable, that promises are kept, and that results are analyzed based on facts, not speeches. And this all starts long before someone reaches a leadership position. It starts with how we educate our children, how we choose our representatives, how we promote our colleagues. It starts in everyday conversations, in small choices, in attitudes that reinforce or combat the culture of appearance. If we want a future with fairer, more prepared, and more humane leadership, we need to cultivate these values from now on. You can't expect people to change when they reach the top, if the path to get there was built with lies, vanity, and toxic competition. This is why education, in every sense, plays a central role in this transformation. But I'm not just talking about school and diplomas. I'm talking about an education that teaches you to think, to listen, to question with respect, to deal with doubt, to accept criticism without falling apart. An education that values dialogue, ethics, and collaboration, because a well-formed people are more difficult to deceive, and consequently, a people more difficult to be led by incompetent people. It's no wonder that in places where critical thinking is encouraged from an early age, we see less space for authoritarian and manipulative leaders. In these contexts, the population is more prepared to ask questions, to demand answers, to not be carried away just by appearances. In places where independent thought is seen as a threat, the ground is fertile for empty promises, beautiful phrases, and theatrical gestures, and it spreads quickly, like smoke that dulls critical sense. But when we can get out of this smoke, see clearly, and create spaces where dialogue and listening are true, something very powerful starts to happen. Confidence returns, motivation grows, good ideas appear, and the talent, which was previously hidden, begins to blossom. Because people are no longer afraid of making mistakes, of proposing, of participating. And when everyone feels part of the process, the result improves for everyone. And when this transformation begins, even if discreetly, it spreads. A space of trust pulls another. Sensible leadership inspires others. A healthier culture takes root. What seemed impossible to change is, little by little, adjusting. Because power, contrary to what many think, is not just in the hands of those who lead. It is also in the hands of those who follow. In our hands. Every time we choose to value honesty over arrogance, listening over shouting, content over image, we are changing the game. The truth is that incompetence, no matter how strong it may seem, only persists Because it finds a favorable environment. When this environment changes, it loses strength. When the eyes open, the masks fall. When people learn to identify signs, to question with respect, to demand clarity, bad leadership loses the comfortable space it had. And good leaders, those who act with responsibility, humility, and preparation, finally have the chance to grow, to show their value, to lead with truth. That's why talking about this topic is not just criticizing what's wrong. It is also an invitation to what can work. Because change doesn't just depend on others. It starts with how we look at the world, how we position ourselves, how we deal with the people around us. If we want better leaders, we need to be better followers. If we want fairer environments, we need to build more honest relationships. If we want a system where competence is valued, we need to stop applauding arrogance disguised as security. And this applies to all contexts. It applies to the company you work for, the group you participate in, the neighborhood where you live, the country where you live. Where there is a leadership relationship, this conversation matters. Because what is at stake is not just who is in charge, but how we decide to live together, build together, solve the challenges that arise together. And in the end, this has everything to do with dignity, with respect, with the desire to see things really work. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. This video was made with care and a lot of reflection, because we believe that thinking about power, leadership, and behavior is a way of taking care of the world around us. If this touched you in some way, if it made sense, if it sparked a new idea or brought clarity to something you already felt, subscribe to the channel, not only to keep up with upcoming content, but to be part of a community that values listening, critical thinking, and real dialogue, and more. Share your story with us. Have you ever experienced a situation similar to the ones we described here? Have you ever worked with someone who rose through confidence rather than competence? Or perhaps you are someone trying to lead fairly in a difficult environment. Tell us here in the comments. Let's open this space for exchange, because your experience can help other people see things they haven't yet realized. If you liked the video, leave a like, comment on what caught your attention and what you learned. This helps the channel grow, yes, but more than that, it helps keep a conversation alive that needs to happen everywhere. Let's build better environments together, where power is not a performance, but a shared responsibility.